Chapter 22, The First Surrender. The penthouse had changed. It was no longer just a temple to Alexander's ego or a glass fortress against the world. With the addition of the medical suite in the East Wing, it had become a sanctuary of humming machines and the clinical scent of hope. I stood in the doorway of my father's new room. The morning light was filtered through the sheer gray curtains, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the hospital bed. He looked peaceful. The best doctors in the world were now a 30-second walk away. The machines monitoring his vitals were the newest models, silent and efficient. Alexander had done this. He had brought the one thing I valued most into the center of his world, but at what cost? I felt him before I heard him. That familiar shift in the air, the heavy, magnetic pull of his presence. I didn't turn around as he walked up behind me. "He's stable, Maya." The lead neurologist just finished the morning briefing. His neural activity is showing slight improvements since the move. "Thank you, Alexander," I whispered. I finally turned to look at him. He was dressed for the office, a midnight blue suit that made his eyes look like stormy seas. But his tie was slightly askew and he wasn't holding his usual espresso. He was just standing there, watching me, his expression guarded. The jealousy from the night before, the fire that had burned through the hospital room when he saw Leo Mercer, was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion. "I have to go to the tower," he said. "The night group is expecting the final audit signatures, but I've increased the floor security. Marcus has the direct line to the medical team." "Alexander." I stepped toward him, my hand reaching out to touch his arm. "You don't have to keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Managing the world so I don't have to feel the wind blow. I saw the way you looked at the security reports this morning. You're turning into a ghost, hunting for threats that don't exist yet." He jaw tightened. "They exist, Maya. Yesterday proved that. But you're losing yourself in the process." I looked up into his eyes, searching for the man I'd seen in the Hamptons. "You brought my father here. You've given me everything. But you're still holding onto the one thing I actually want." "And what's that?" "The truth of how you're feeling. Not the CEO's perspective. Not the protector's plan, just you." Alexander looked away, his gaze fixing on the Manhattan skyline. "I don't know how to give you that, Maya. In my world, the truth is a vulnerability, and vulnerability is a death sentence." "Not with me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "With me, it's the only way we survive this." He didn't answer, he just kissed my forehead, a lingering, almost desperate touch, and walked toward the elevator. I watched the doors close. He was still fighting. He was still trying to win a war where the only enemy was his own heart. Alexander POV. The 90th floor of Blackwood Tower felt like a vacuum. I sat at my desk, the night group files spread out before me, but I couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maya standing in that medical suite. I saw the look of empathy in her eyes, the way she looked at me not as a titan, but as a man who was drowning. It infuriated me, and it terrified me. "Sir, Lord Knight is on line 1, Marcus said through the intercom. "Tell him I'll call him back." "Sir, he's been waiting since." "I don't care, Marcus. Tell him I'm busy." I stood up and walked to the window. The city was a grid of ambition and greed, a world I had mastered. But inside this office, I felt like a fraud. I had spent years building a reputation for being untouchable, and now, a woman with hazel eyes and a father in a hospital bed had dismantled me in less than a month. I thought about Leo Mercer. I thought about the way Maya had defended him. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the realization that there were parts of her life that I couldn't buy. There were memories she shared with other people that were filled with warmth and light, things my childhood had been devoid of. My mother's voice echoed in my head. The Blackwood family doesn't do love, Alexander. We do alliances. I sat back down, my head in my hands. Was that what I was doing? Was I just building a very expensive, very intimate alliance? No. Because if it were an alliance, I wouldn't feel this physical ache in my chest every time she left the room. If it were an alliance, I wouldn't have brought her father into my home. I was surrendering. Slow, agonizingly, piece by piece. I was giving up the control that had kept me alive. The door to my office opened. I didn't look up, assuming it was Marcus with another urgent demand. I told you I was busy, Marcus. I'm not Marcus. I looked up. Maya was standing there. She wasn't wearing one of the power suits I'd bought her. She was wearing a simple, oversized sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked like she belonged in a library or a park or a home. Maya, what are you doing here? I told you to stay at the penthouse. And I told you I wasn't a shut-in. She walked across the room, her movements graceful and determined. She didn't stop until she was on my side of the desk. You left your tablet, the one with the encryption keys for the second phase. I knew you'd need it for the night call. She set the tablet on the desk, but she didn't leave. She stayed there, looking at me with an intensity that stripped away the mask of the CEO. You're not busy, Alexander, she said softly. You're hiding. So I'm running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Maya. I don't have time to hide. You have time to stare out the window. You have time to snap at Marcus. You have time to wonder if I'm going to call Leo the second you leave. I flinched. The accuracy of her strike was surgical. I don't want to talk about Mercer. I know you don't, because talking about him means admitting you're human. It means admitting that you're afraid of losing something you can't control with a contract. She reached out and took my hands, pulling them away from my face. Her touch was warm, grounding. She didn't pull me to her. She just held me there in the silence of the 90th floor. Alexander, look at me. I looked. I'm not Sarah Jenkins, she said, her voice a steady, beautiful anchor. I'm not an agreement from 2012. I'm the woman who loves you, but I can't love a statue. I need you to let me in, not just into your bed and not just into your penthouse. I need you to let me into the mess. I felt the first crack in the wall, a deep, seismic shift that made my breathing hitch. There is no mess, Maya, I rasped, though my voice was breaking. There is only the Empire, and the Empire has to be perfect. The Empire is a lie, she countered. It's a beautiful, expensive lie you tell yourself so you don't have to remember what it feels like to be alone. But you're not alone anymore. You have me, and I'm not going anywhere. She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. Surrender, Alexander, not to me, to us. The word hit me like a physical blow. Surrender. I had spent my life winning. I had spent my life taking territory. The idea of surrendering, of giving up the high ground, felt like death. But as I smelled the jasmine in her hair and felt the steady beat of her heart against my hands, I realized that I was already dead. I had been dead for years, a ghost in a charcoal suit. This woman, this heat, this terrifying vulnerability was life. I let out a long, ragged breath that sounded like a sob. I pulled my hands from hers and wrapped them around her waist, pulling her into my lap. I buried my face in her shoulder, my body shaking with the force of the release. I wasn't crying, not yet, but I was breaking. The first surrender was happening. I was letting go of the need to be the man who owned the room. I was becoming the man who belonged to her. I'm scared, Maya, I whispered into her sweater. The admission was the most difficult thing I'd ever said, harder than the confession of love, harder than the threats to Vane. "I know," she murmured, her hand stroking the back of my head. "I am too. If I let you in, if I really let you see, you might realize that I'm not the titan you think I am. You might realize that I'm just as broken as the world I'm trying to fix." "I already know you're broken, Alexander. That's why I'm here. I don't want a titan. I want the man who stayed with me in the rain. I want the man who saved my father because he knew it was the only thing that mattered to me." She pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. She reached up and wiped a stray tear from my cheek, a tear I hadn't even realized I'd shed. "You don't have to be perfect for me," she said. "You just have to be real." I looked at her and the final piece of the armor fell away. I felt raw, exposed, vulnerable in a way that made me want to crawl into a hole and never come out. But I also felt lighter. The weight of the Blackwood name, the pressure of the empire, the constant need to be the predator, it all seemed to evaporate in the heat of her gaze. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I kissed her then. It wasn't a kiss of passion or possession. It was a kiss of peace. A sealing of a new kind of contract, one written in the language of the heart. The first surrender wasn't a loss. It was the greatest victory I'd ever achieved. Maya POV. We stayed in his office for a long time. The phones continued to ring. Marcus knocked once, heard the silence, and wisely retreated. The world continued to spin outside the glass walls, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Alexander was different. The tension in his shoulders had vanished. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were soft. He was still the billionaire, still the man who moved markets, but the statue had finally cracked, and the man inside was beautiful. "You should go back to the penthouse," he said, though he didn't let go of my hand. "The medical team will be wondering where you are." "I'll go, but only if you promise to be home by 6. No late-night sessions in the lab, no extra meetings with the legal team." "I promise." He stood up and walked me to the door. As he opened it, he looked out at the executive lobby. The staff were all watching, their curiosity palpable. Alexander didn't care. He leaned down and kissed me right there in front of everyone, a long, slow, unmistakable kiss of love. He wasn't marking territory. He was showing the world that he was no longer alone. I walked to the elevator, my heart feeling like it was glowing. The fire of Act II was still there, but it was no longer a destructive force. It was the warmth of a hearth. But as the doors closed, I saw Marcus approaching Alexander with a grim expression. The peace was temporary. The world was already coming back for him. Alexander POV. "What is it, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady, but the softness of the moment still lingering in my chest. "Vane Global has officially declared bankruptcy, sir." I froze. Bankruptcy, already. My audit shouldn't have hit them that hard yet. It didn't. Julian Vane did it himself. He's liquidating his assets to a private equity firm in the Caymans. A firm we can't track, sir. It's a scorched earth policy. He's dumping the sterling IP into the public domain as a parting gift. The air in the room turned to ice. If the code goes public, the Horizon project is worthless, I said, the CEO mask snapping back into place by sheer necessity. Every tech giant in the world will have the algorithm by morning. There's more, sir. Julian Vane left a message for you, personally. Marcus handed me a small, handwritten envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "A surrender is only beautiful when you have something left to save. I'm taking the heart out of your empire, Alexander. Let's see if the sterling girl still loves a man who owns a pile of ashes." I felt a surge of cold, focused rage. Julian Vane wasn't just trying to ruin me, he was trying to prove that my surrender to Maya was a mistake. He was trying to take the success of the project and turn it into a funeral pyre for our relationship. "Call the legal team," I commanded, my voice returning to the lethal vibration the world knew. "And get the tech team to the 91st floor. I don't care if Vane is bankrupt. I'm going to find where he's hiding that server, and I'm going to burn it to the ground." "Sir, Maya." "Don't tell her," I said, stopping Marcus. "Not yet. She's finally found some peace with her father. I won't have it ruined by Vane's desperation." I walked toward the private elevator. The first surrender was over. The fallout was beginning. And as I ascended toward the lab, I realized that Julian Vane had made one final, fatal mistake. He thought I was vulnerable because I loved Maya. He didn't realize that loving her had given me a reason to be more ruthless than he could ever imagine. He wanted to see if she still loved a man who owned a pile of ashes. Fine. I would show him that even from the ashes, a blackwood always rises. And this time, I wasn't just rising for the empire. I was rising for the woman who had taught me how to breathe. Maya POV 6:00 p.m. I waited in the living room. The table was set for dinner. The medical team had reported a quiet afternoon. My father had squeezed my hand for the first time since the stroke. It was a day of miracles. But Alexander didn't come home at 6, or 7, or 8. I looked at the Vigil of Justice statue in the foyer. The scales looked heavier than usual. The first surrender had been beautiful. It had been the moment I'd been waiting for. But as the clock ticked toward midnight and the penthouse remained silent, I realized that the mess I had asked him to let me into was bigger than I thought. I walked to the window, looking out at the city. The lights of the Blackwood Tower were still burning on the 91st floor. He was back in the lab. He was back in the war. And as I stood there, alone in the glass tower, I realized that the surrender was only the beginning. The real test wasn't whether he could let me in. It was whether he could stay. Alexander POV 2:00 a.m. I stood in the blue light of the lab, my eyes burning from the hours of code. We had stopped the leak. We had found the server in the Caymans, and we had encrypted it from the inside out. Julian Vane's parting gift was currently a series of broken links and corrupted data. But I was exhausted. My soul felt like it had been scraped raw. I looked at the ring I'd been carrying in my pocket for 3 days, a simple diamond, no larger than a pea but perfect in its clarity. I had bought it the morning after the one hotel room. I had planned to give it to her tonight after the surrender. But looking at the ruins of Vane's empire on the screen, I realized that the world was never going to stop coming for us. There would always be another Vane, another Henderson, another shadow. I walked to the window of the lab, looking toward the penthouse. I had surrendered my heart. I had given her my truth. But as the fire of Act II began to settle into a cold, hard ember, I knew that I couldn't just love her. I had to become the wall she thought I didn't need. I put the ring back in my pocket. Tonight wasn't the night for promises. Tonight was a night for survival. And as I stepped into the elevator to go home, I realized the price of my surrender. I was no longer the man who owned the room. I was the man who had everything to lose. And that made me the most dangerous man in New York. Next chapter, Chapter 23, Morning After Tension.